Glad to see everybody back. We're going to talk for a few minutes about the second segment of chapter one. And we mentioned in the first segment that economics is considered a social science. If you think about social sciences, you've got economics, you've got anthropology, you've got political science, you've got psychology, you've got sociology. Those are just a few social sciences, are considered disciplines of social science because they all study choice and they all study people and human behavior. So, people ask, okay, if it's a social science, why is economics so special, or what differentiates economics from the other social sciences? And the building blocks for economics as a social science, as we talked about in the first segment, the building blocks are set there in scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost. And remember, we talked about all three of these in segment one when we were talking about it. And all three of these are linked together in the economic mindset in the decision-making process. So as we make choices as consumers, individuals, we are faced with scarcity because we have unlimited wants, limited resources, and we're also faced with opportunity cost because as we make choices among alternative opportunities, there is a opportunity cost, because if you choose choice A, you may not choose choice B, C, D, or E. And that is the foregone opportunity of choosing option A. So just to kind of get an idea of what separates economics from your other social sciences, that's kind of the beginning of what we're going to look at. And the features that really distinguish economics from your other social sciences is, again, opportunity cost. What are you going to have to forego if you make a choice of option A over option B or any other option? And economists also believe that people are going to make self-interested choices. So everybody is interested in self. They are going to the term that most people talk about is they're going to optimize. They're looking at optimization. Individuals, consumers are constantly trying to optimize that terminology or that term that economics or economists have coined over the years, that term where they talk about utility. And it's, the benefit or the satisfaction that you get for consuming a good or service. So economics differentiates itself from the other social sciences because they make the assumption that consumers are self-centered or are concerned about self-interest, and they're concerned about optimizing utility. And if you think about it, you're either going to maximize a desirable good or service, or you're trying to minimize maybe an undesirable good or services. And if you think about individuals, we're trying to maximize utility in our decision process. If you think about companies or entities, they are trying to do a similar maximization approach, but they're trying to maximize profits. So everybody's out making choices, trying to, in their self-interest, trying to either maximize or minimize something. So, you want to maximize as an individual. If you live in the state of Tennessee, to some extent, you're thought about maximizing your disposable income. There's no state income tax in Tennessee. So the same dollar that you earn in Tennessee, you are going to be able to take home more disposable income because you're not impacted by state income tax. If you lived in Kentucky or North Carolina, Arkansas, if you think about, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, some of the states that surround Tennessee, all of those states have state income tax, and you would be taking home less disposable income in those states because you're having to pay state income tax. So you, as a consumer, as you work in the state of Tennessee, you are thinking about maximizing your disposable income. You're thinking about, if you're a student, you're thinking about, at least hopefully, you're thinking about maximizing your grades, maximizing your ability to learn, maximizing your GPA. Once you get out into the world and start, your first job, or maybe on your second job, you're thinking about things like maximizing your healthcare benefits. You want to maximize the number of vacation or PTO days. You want to maximize your salary. You're wanting to maximize that benefit package that you're receiving for going to work every day. And you think about the flip side of that. As an individual, especially, most individuals try to minimize the taxes they pay. They try to minimize their, daily expenditures, the cost of food, transportation, lodging. You're talking about trying to minimize all those expenditures. And, not only that, and I'm probably as guilty of it as everybody else. I want to minimize standing in line. I hate to go somewhere and stand in line for 15 or 20 minutes just waiting. That's 15 or 20 minutes I could have enjoyed doing something else. So I like to minimize standing in line. And if you're thinking about, the self-interest, that's where your optimization, that's where you're optimizing. You're talking about maximization and minimization. And then the third thing, individuals make choices at the margin. Not only individuals, but companies make choices at the margin. And, when you talk about the margin, it's, there's a current level of activity. And when you make that decision at the margin, you're either deciding to do a little more, or you're deciding to do a little less. If you think about, we lived in Southern California for 20 some years, and they were always harping on you in Southern California to minimize your water usage, because as long as we lived in California, there was always an issue with water. This summer, with the heat that has been, at least across the Southeast especially, people are not only being asked to minimize electrical use, but the cost of electricity, the cost of that kilowatt hour, is going to force you to try to minimize your use of electricity, because you're talking about having to pay an excessive amount of your disposable income to pay those electric bills. So that's where we're talking about making choices at the margin. But probably the best example of making choices at the margin is the one that they have in the textbook. So, and I don't remember the exact dollar values, but I want to say, you were going into a fast food joint, and, you could buy a hamburger, a Coke, and an order of French fries for like let's say $9. Or if you, and they talk about the clown that, going through the drive-thru, said, would you like to make it a meal for $8? So now you're faced with making a choice. If you had a $10 bill in your pocket, you could buy those items individually, or you could buy a hamburger and a Coke, and for an extra $1 rather than $2. If you bought the French fries by themselves, it was $2, but a hamburger or Coke, and in that value meal, the French fries only cost you $1. So at that point, you're making a decision at the margin. You're trying to decide, man, I'd really like to have a hamburger or Coke and order fries, and if I can get them for $8 rather than paying $9 for them, I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to get them for $8. And that's what we are faced with on a daily basis, is making purchases, making decisions at the margin. When you're faced with making that decision, are you going to do a little more? Or are you going to do a little less? And what's the cost of doing a little more? And what's the cost of doing a little less? And then we've also talked about utility, and it's the total satisfaction or benefit from consuming a good or service. I can remember the first micro class I took as an undergraduate, and when they started talking about utility and utils, and I thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. But economists have come up with that phrase as a value. It's kind of a universal way to value the consumption, the benefit, the satisfaction as you consume those goods or services. I don't know whether this textbook gets into it or not, but the other thing that used to drive me crazy in an econ class, where the professors would talk about, we're making widgets. What in the heck is a widget? I mean, I used to think, between utils and utility and widgets, I used to think it was the stupidest thing in the world. But as we'll get farther into the discussion of microeconomics, you'll find that they are using those terms to help generalize and help simplify models. And we'll get into that a little in the next segment of chapter 1. But as goofy as those terms sound, it does help economists because the world is extremely complex, and it helps economists simplify that. Something that other people talk about is that if I get questioned a lot. I taught a macro class this summer, and now I'm teaching a micro class in the fall, but people ask, what's the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics? So microeconomics, it's ancient Greek that essentially means small. Macroeconomics, again, from ancient Greek, it essentially means large. When you're talking about microeconomics, you're talking about choices made typically by individuals, firms or entities, and markets. If you're talking about macroeconomics is looking at markets as a whole. They're looking at the entire market economy for, let's say, the United States. They're interested in how that, consumer price index, which is their, estimation of inflation, GDP, gross domestic product, that estimates growth in the economy. They're looking at unemployment rates. So how do those three large scale concepts, how do they actually impact choices? How do they impact the total economy? And how do they impact the well-being and the satisfaction of the population within the borders of the United States? And then lastly, we'll kind of touch on just for a few minutes, talking about, they touch on it a little in the text, and they talk about, employment opportunities for an economist. I think what most people find is those individuals that major or to some extent minor in economics as an undergraduate, they have more of an analytical mindset. A lot of those individuals that do well in econ classes have kind of a, I don't know, it's a mathematical mindset. Maybe they've had, they do well at math, or they've had more courses in math. A lot of universities, if you're going to major in economics, you're going to have at least one calculus class. Some universities expect you to have, a couple of calculus classes. Economists are somewhat of a detective, because as an economist, and it's not going to matter what market economy you go to work in, healthcare, finance, production economy, maybe you go to work for the Federal Reserve. All of those different environments, you're going to be you're going to be functioning somewhat as a detective, because you're going to be asked to forecast, you're going to be asked to estimate, you're going to be asked to predict. And as you develop your models to do all of these, to complete all of these tasks, you're going to have that, you're going to have to be continually asking, why, what if, what happens if I change my model, what's going to happen? So you have to be somewhat of a detective. most economists, especially if you go on and get a PhD, you end up as a professor at a university somewhere. Maybe you go to work as an analyst. When I got out of, got my PhD at Ohio State, and my first job, I was a economic analyst for Economic Research Service, which was the analytical branch of the Department of Agriculture. And I was doing work in, production of commodities. And I was not out of the ordinary that I was asked to go to either Senate or House of Representative subcommittees and answer questions for them. I went over there multiple times. Once the California rice growers were lobbying because it was an issue again with water. They needed more water to grow rice. And, there was talking about, so I did rice, I did corn, I did wheat, I did, fat cattle and feeder cattle. So you were looking at all of these commodities, and that was as an analyst. And at ERS, there was, I don't know, 800-900 economists all in one building. And that's what we were all doing. We were forecasting, we were predicting, we were estimating, and you were expected at any time to be able to go over to Congress and to answer questions and to help them make decisions and policy-based decisions that regarding the agricultural output of the United States. Economists also go to work on Wall Street. They work in the financial markets. So they may be at Wall Street in New York, or they may be working at the Chicago Board of Trade or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in Chicago. And you may be working for the Federal Reserve. You may go into business. I worked for 3 years at ERS, and then I went into healthcare. And the rest of my career was spent in the healthcare market. Been on the health plan side. I've been on the provider side of the house. So, and my job was to, again, predict, forecast, analyze, estimate the impact of changes in the healthcare environment and what was it going to do either to the provider's side of the house or what was it going to do to the payer of the health plan side of the house. So that just gives you an idea of what the book was talking about when it started talking about what your employment opportunities are. And as an economist, the employment opportunities are vast. You are not pigeonholing yourself into a specific job opportunity, because with a degree in economics, you have a significant and a wide array of employment opportunities if you so desire it. That's going to kind of wrap up segment 2 of chapter 1. We're going to come back at, and I think we're only going to do 3 segments in chapter 1. We'll come back and finish it up in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about the Economist Toolkit and, what they do on a daily basis, what skill sets do they do, how do they develop models, and what they do. So, and how they get to the situation, or how they get and develop their ability, or how they get to the conclusions that they draw as they forecast, predict, and estimate. Talk to you in a minute. Thank you.